Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Taking the Lead, where we get to speak with leaders, mostly from PR and comms and advertising and marketing. But we don't really talk much about PR, marketing, advertising, comms. We talk mostly about leadership. And I am delighted to be interviewing today someone who was recommended on a previous Take the Lead. Let me tell you a little bit about him. Well, it's Aaron Kwittken. He's the founder and CEO of PR Profit. You'll correct me if I'm saying it wrong. And the CEO of Comms Tech Unit of the Stagwell Marketing Cloud. And as you can see, he's speaking to us from the clouds today. He's known by many of us for being the founder and CEO of KWT Global, which those of you who are old enough like me remember as Kwittken from around 20 years ago. He's a guest lecturer at USC Annenberg School for Communication and Journalism and the George Washington University, which awarded Aaron the Spirit of GW Award, which is, for those who don't know, the Outstanding Alumni Service Award. Too many honors to mention here. It would take our full 20 minutes, but some include PR Week Dashboard 2023, the AI edition, PR Week Dashboard 25, 2022, Provoke Innovator 25, 2021, and PR Week 40 under 40. I retain hope that there will be a 70 under 70. And if they ever do that, some kind person will nominate me. I don't know. I don't want to believe that time has passed. Anyway, we spent a lot of time talking about him. Let's bring him in. Welcome, Aaron Kwittken, to Taking the Lead.
You're so kind, Ken, and thank you for aging me. I think that 40 under 40 was almost 14 years ago, but
it was 40 under 40. 40 under 40. Let's get
40 under 40. Yeah, I'm still hoping for 60 under 60 or 50 over 50 or something, but yeah.
There you go. But then we'd be competing. So let's do the under. Let's do the
okay.
Under thing.
Fair enough.
Okay,
thank you for having me, though.
Good.
Too kind.
Truly a pleasure. So you built, and I'm going to quote you, the PR industry's first AI platform, and it was long before the AI hype cycle, which I think began around 2 years ago, but you can correct me. But we're not going to discuss PR for now. How can those like me in leadership development and coaching, how can we effectively use AI? And explain it to me like I'm a third grader, please.
You're way better than that. So if I had to explain it to the third grader, we can talk about lizard brain and monkey brain, right? So like, your lizard brain, yeah, it's the fight flight, right? It's the moving with muscle memory instinctually. And there's monkey brain. And when I think about AI and I think about coaching and leadership, we're going to put PR to the side. The application of it with leadership and coaching is actually not that different. You're going to look for four things. One is, what is it that you really don't like to do by way of tasks? What is it that takes you too long to do? Sometimes it's also things you don't like to do. Oftentimes they're one of the same. Where is it that you need inspiration, where you're lacking it? Or where is it that you need education or edification, right? AI can help in all those areas. And I think it's interesting when you think about leadership and development and coaching, because when I think about that and AI's application, sure, you can go to applications like Udly and record yourself and get instant kind of AI feedback. That's very transactional in what's really a very humanistic type of business. But when I think about what you're talking about, to me, it's really about iterating. How do you think in nonlinear ways? Because we are programmed to think in the same way over and over again. AI helps us expand our boundaries, expand our thought, think in a nonlinear manner. And whether it's generative or predictive, and the thing about AI, and you mentioned this, yeah, 2 years ago, it was a big hype, ChatGPT. It's a false flag. Unfortunately, when you say AI, people think generative. That is not the future for leadership and coaching or PR. It's about being more predictive. So how can I test and learn in my leadership style? And it could be a narrative that I'm engaging stakeholders. It could be employees. It could be partners. It could be customers. How do I test that in the cloud using AI before I do it in real life so I can better predict outcomes? That's where AI is going to be most impactful, not necessarily in the generative side.
Interesting. And you've made me definitely want to learn more and actually be excited about it. Because I think for many of us, I mean, for me, learn more about AI has been on my to-do list for how long? For how long? Now I feel it's a little more concrete. So thank you. So for our many viewers who are in PR and comms, let's discuss AI and PR. There's tremendous power in AI. We know that. And I think with that can come tremendous potential risk. What are the most important things PR leaders can do to assure that they and their teams, their organizations, are using AI in a way that's appropriate and I think especially ethical?
So let's take a step back just for a second. Those are very good questions. The PR industry is still new to this. AI is operating at velocity. Our industry is operating with inertia. And we spend all of our days helping others tell their transformation stories, yet we don't look at ourselves, mostly because of inferiority and interiority, and I can go on and on about that. But what I'm seeing is that as adoption continues, and it's pretty slow, state of chattiness, high, state of readiness, low. I'm seeing more and more agencies and brands experiment. That's important. They are creating committees. These are not set it and forget it committees. These are committees that have to meet weekly and update guidelines that they're creating monthly. These guidelines address things like what large language models should we use? What SLAs, contracts are we engaging in where that vendor's indemnifying us so that, God forbid, we breach someone's copyright by way of image or text, that we're not going to be held legally liable. Also, there are guidelines and there are considerations around disclosure. Now, I have a very strong view about that. Imagine if President Biden, when he gives his State of the Union, if there's credits that rolled afterwards. Imagine the years of work that I have done where I'm the ghostwriter behind bylines, pitches, all sorts of content. I don't get attribution. By definition, PR people are the invisible hand. We're behind the curtain, yet, oh, what about disclosure? What about Grammarly? We don't disclose. So I think disclosure is going to fade, as also issues around data provenance and data lineage and things like that start to become, thanks to people like John Awada and others, become more tied down, right? So it's really around making sure that we are as transparent as humanly possible. But also the biggest consideration agencies and brands need to think about is the unit economics of that relationship. How will AI transform that? Is the billable hour dead? Should we move to value-based billing? Why, as a brand, am I paying Aaron Kwittken to take the longest way possible to provide a service to me when I want it fast and I want it good? AI is going to deliver it fast, and eventually it's going to be really, really good, right? So I think those are all the considerations. Those are all the things that we need to openly talk about as an agency and as a brand.
What are I don't know if this is the right word, either the training wheels, the protections we need to be very mindful of as we jump in to make sure we do it right?
Well, we have to have a communications engineering mindset. That's not a skill set. It's a mindset. So what that means is that we need to train our people on platforms. It means that we need to view platforms and software not as expenditures, not as a cost, but as an investment. It means that we need to have people who are specifically in charge of data and analytics and innovation on the agency side and on the brand side. It means that they need to also then be very, very lockstep with people who have legal understanding of copyright, of contracts, of the corpus of data that we're calling them large language models. And you can't just use one large language model. And by that, it could be GPT-4, it could be GPT-5, it could be Anthropic, Azure. There are all these different, it could be Gemini, which used to be called Bard, which is Google. The thing that the biggest challenge here is keeping up with it. It is moving so fast. And my biggest concern is you see a lot of large agencies are like, we just partnered with NVIDIA and GC and Google Cloud, and we're going to build this. Good luck. This is a very different model, very capital intensive. Everybody should have the mindset of renting, not owning, when it comes to these tools. And I say this as someone who's had a lot of scar tissue, who's pivoted as a recovered agency guy in building this for 4 years. And for the first 2 years, screaming into the wind. I call it screaming into the pillow. because no one would listen when I'm like, no, 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 this is going to be consequential.
Interesting, interesting. What, yeah, I have to, when did you first become aware of this and how?
So I was really inspired by a client of mine called Data Miner. And it's without the ER, it's just R. And they do something called ground truth. And they're my client for 5, 6 years, brilliant people. And I finally met people who are data scientists and neuroscientists. And they taught me about neural networks and machine learning and natural language processing and vectoring and semantic search versus Boolean search. And I was like, oh my God, and I was doing crisis and issues work for these folks. And most of their customers were like public service agencies and law enforcement, media organizations, financial services, because they're basically monitoring social media to help validate what's going on from events, right? And I'm like, well, if they can do this, why can't I look back at past media coverage, predict future media interest, reporter interest and sentiment? If movie studios and book publishers are doing this to determine the future commercial viability around a script, why can't we do the same? We're doing it totally ass backwards, and we're very instinctual, and we think our currency are relationships, but the world is commoditizing. And the truth is that we need to replace guessing with knowing. We need data to backstop our instinct. And you know this as well as I do. Every client or every boss thinks they're way more interesting than they really are. And it's left to the PR people to like pick up the pieces and make it interesting. We never had data to say, hey, you know what, Ken? Actually, that's not interesting. But if we turn it this way, or you know what, that shouldn't necessarily be a press release or a pitch. That's just a blog. But we never had that data like our marketing siblings did. And we just had our instinct. In my case, good looks and charm. You don't have to agree, but we had nothing.
Goes without saying. Goes without saying.
Exactly.
Funny.
Yeah.
All right. So you have what, from my perspective, could easily be two full-time jobs, maybe two full-time plus jobs. Tell us about the self-care you do so your head doesn't explode.
Well, what you call self-care, I call a regulator. So to me, they didn't in the 70s and 80s. I'm going to go way back. This is like going to be a therapy session now. I should be on a couch. In the 70s and 80s, they didn't really identify ADHD, and probably now they overdiagnose it, right? But I clearly had it and have it. And for me, it's all about exercise. So I have a lot of energy. My poor wife of now 26 years, I mean, she's incredible. But, I'm somebody that doesn't sleep a lot. I can't shut my brain off. And the only way to regulate, outside of meds, which I've never taken, is I run, I swim, I bike, I do hot yoga, I do a lot of meditation. And I love just sometimes just sitting, and I'm obsessed with the New Yorker and the Atlantic, and I listen to podcasts. But for me, it's really about exercise. I need a physical activity to regulate myself and take care of myself. And first and foremost, I've always put my family first. It's the reason why I started my agency 20 years ago, because if I'm going to work this hard, I might as well work for myself. And I said to my wife at the time, my kids were like 4 and 1. Like, I'll just go get a job. We're already in debt. We already have a mortgage. So if this doesn't work, I'll just go find a job. And, God bless her for standing behind me. But it was one of the things I'm most proud of, and being able to give other people opportunities to grow in their careers, and to see folks who've worked for me for years, go off and get married and have kids and have families and have their own incredible professional endeavors. That is what brings me joy. It really does.
That's wonderful. So speaking of exercise, you are a triathlon coach. What has that taught you about leadership?
An old track coach of mine, Bob Waterman, still kicking, incredible human. He said excellence and comfort can't coexist. And that was a very big learning when I was running cross country at age, 15, 16. But I've taken that into my life, actually. And I've done a bunch of Ironmans, done a bunch of marathons. I like to race competitively. And I think one of the things you learn as a coach is that you never race against others, you race against yourself. Your PRs, your personal records, should be for yourself, right? And I remember I used to be a competitive swimmer. You never looked in the lane next to you if you're running or swimming. You always have to look straight ahead, right? And the other thing it teaches you focus. It teaches you to be prepared for anything can possibly happen. So for anybody that's listening that's an endurance athlete, especially Ironman or triathlon, those are 3 sports in one. It's, swim, bike, run. and anything can happen. You can have a flat tire. You can have a gastrointestinal issue. I'm not going to get into that, Ken. I promise you'll never invite me back.
Please. Remember the
so many
rules of
things,
taking the lead.
right? And I'm a
PMI.
crisis guy. My background's crisis and issues. So I always think in possibilities and then probabilities, and I'm prepared for anything. And I think when you're preparing for an endurance event, it's not that dissimilar for preparing for a presentation, for preparing for a tough meeting, preparing for a new business pitch, for client counseling, anything that's like big or small. And I think preparation and focus and focusing on the end goal and focusing on yourself and managing your time. Biggest problem most people have is time management, right? And you see this in your job, in your career.
Yeah, coaching works for that, by the way.
It does. And if you sign up for a race, first of all, the first thing you do is you tell everybody because you're going to be held accountable. You have to do that race. You have to show up. But if you sign up for a race, you have to work backwards. And if you're going to sign up for an Ironman, there's a certain point at which you're training for 16 hours in a week. You have a full-time job and you've got a family, you've got friends, you've got other obligations. It forces you actually to be more focused than ever before. The more spare time you have, probably the less performative you're going to be.
Interesting. All right, last question.
Yeah.
All of us on this leadership journey have had moments that made us wince. Please share your absolute worst leadership moment, a real point in time when you were not bringing your best as a leader, quite the opposite. And please be brutally honest. What happened? How did you recover? What'd you learn?
Can I give you two?
Sure. That'll make
Okay.
up for the ones we asked some of our taking the lead interview. They don't really answer. So yeah, so you're paying a kindness to someone else.
Well, put it this way. Anybody that knows me knows that, I'm brutally honest and I'm probably my biggest critic. No one's harsher on me than me. I'm going to give you one from when I was very young and one during COVID. So when I was very young in my career, I was like 24, 25. I was an account supervisor at a very large, reputable agency in DC. I had a client that, this is pre.com, but a client that liked to party, put it that way. And one day he was kind of inappropriate. And this is in the early 90s. And I'm not making that as an excuse, it's just a different era. But I was also very young. And he walked through the office one day and he said to me, he said, I'm going to repick the team. And he basically tried to pick out every beautiful woman in the office as humanly possible to stack the team. And I was frozen. I was scared. We were billing this guy $200,000 a month in the early 90s. It was a big, big account. I was in my early 20s. I had no reason even being an account supervisor managing this piece of business. And I didn't say anything. I never said anything to him. And I was just kind of like walking along. Now, we never did anything about it, but it's so inappropriate. It made me sick to my stomach. I wasn't married yet. And I remember telling my friends about this. And the way I kind of recovered is I made a commitment to myself that anytime I would see something that was wrong, I would act on it, even if I kind of overacted on it. And I've held to that through my entire career, especially around gender issues. The second thing, it was a big leadership lesson was, we're coming up on the 4th anniversary of George Floyd. I know you're never supposed to date yourself in a podcast or YouTube, but here I am dating myself. And I was still managing my agency and trying to start profit. We were, I believe, at the beginning of COVID, so we're in lockdown. So we didn't have human connection. We had, at the time, a very diverse agency by almost every measure you can think of. And smartly, we had a call right away, an all hands call. Stupidly, I sent out a note and I wasn't really thinking, and it was from the heart, but I actually quoted Elie Wiesel. I didn't, and I wasn't thinking about it. And the quote and the intent was right. And it was really about silence is violence and how an atrocity against one is atrocity against all. It was really about that shared history between Jews and Blacks around social justice, of which is a very rich history. And I also, at the time, was president of my temple. So I was kind of like in that mindset, and a couple of members of the team who were Black reached out to me and they were deeply hurt and offended. Like, why couldn't you quote a member of the Black community? Why couldn't you really think about what you're saying. And they weren't offended, except that I also, instead of reaching out to them first and talking to them, I just kind of wrote a note to the staff. And then I got on a call, and I lost it. I started crying. There's about 80, 85, 90 people on my staff at the time. And I couldn't speak. I literally lost it. And I was never more kind of embarrassed and felt so vulnerable. I might as well have been standing naked in front of thousands of people. And a couple minutes later, we were on Slack back then. Now everybody's on Teams. I got the most beautiful notes from mostly people from every ethnicity, every kind of background you can imagine in the agency, sending me beautiful notes saying thank you for just being yourself and not trying to like be something else. And I mentioned that because it was a huge learning, and I've always allowed myself to be vulnerable. But I think it's very important that we're human first, and that we're leaders second. And I know it sounds funny, but we shouldn't overthink it. But I really wish I hadn't. I really wish I had actually reached out to others to take input on such a sensitive topic in the same way that I would advise a client before sending a note out. So those are two. I'm sure I can come up with 10 more, but those are the two that come to mind when you ask me that question.
Well, thank you for sharing so honestly. I think in moments like we experienced that spring and summer of 2020, I think being willing to be vulnerable because a lot of your teams were probably feeling vulnerable. I think there's great power in that. And I think the feedback you got immediately thereafter shows how that was the right thing to do, being vulnerable,
Yeah.
because I think people feel a human connection to their leaders, especially at tougher times. So great learning there. I want to thank you, Aaron Kwittken. For those of you who don't, this is the first time we've met, we think. We're not quite sure. So
Not
this
sure.
is crazy. And I do want to thank David Barco of Carve Communications, who mentioned you in his interview, and that got us thinking, hey, we should do this. And just thank everyone for joining us again. If you want to connect with Aaron, I'm going to take the liberty of saying find him on LinkedIn. If you want to connect with me to discuss leadership issues, how you can be a more effective leader, either for you or someone on your team, KEN@JACOBSCOMM.com. And as we always say, till next time, keep on taking the lead.